Okay, now we're recording. Luckily, we haven't gotten into the actual content, but I will post this as well. So if you need to get out early, that's fine. I'll post the rest of this. So yes, discussion, don't worry about that. We can always be on talks. Make sure, I just want everyone to have it in by tonight. Exam should be open today, so if you are here and you're going over the material, me personally, once I've done that, if you feel comfortable, if you've studied before this, what I would do honestly is take it today, right, while it's fresh on your mind. I feel like the longer you wait, even though I extended exam 2 all the way, I think 2 weeks past the point in which it was supposed to be taken, and most people ended up procrastinating. I have a feeling by the time you get to that point, a lot of the content that we've had from far back, it doesn't stick with you the same way it does if you do it while you're fresh with the material. So that being said, do we have any logistical questions before we go forward? Oh, I see 5 chat. That's alerting to me. Maybe people are doing okay. Okay, you guys are chatting there. I didn't realize you were responding in chat. Extra credit was supposed to be due by tonight, the same as like last day of class. So, okay. Anyone else? You can also speak it if you're typing. Where do you find the extra credit? It was posted, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago in the, it's in the like syllabus section because I didn't know where else to put it. How many questions? It should be 40 like the rest of them. I was debating, yeah, no problem. I was debating doing 30 this time around, but there was enough to do 40, and I figure if we do 30, that might stress some people out because then that's only, each question is worth a lot more. So I decided to keep with the same amount. How many points was the extra credit? So it's 3 paragraphs, and that's 1 point per paragraph. And for when it's out of 50, that can do, you know, a good chunk. So. Anything else? Okay, so let's move into content. If you still have any of those logistical type questions, if it pops up, feel free to type them into chat and I will get to or say them out loud as well. Okay, so what we're gonna do is obviously the usual type of review. So I would recommend that you follow along. One of the big things that hopefully you all know by now about like Word documents, and I think I put this somewhere, is that you can hit Control F to quickly find a keyword. And this is just pretty much any document. It's also on the internet. So say that you move to a question. This is just exam strategy in general. And that's why I do the bold keywords, right? So that if you're the print them out like I am, the print them out type and highlight so that I can physically while in class write down notes, I can very easily flip to the section, figure out if I need to, if I can't remember the answer type thing. But you can also Control F to find keywords inside of your notes. Other kinds of strategy things is what I would do is pull up your, the extra credit, sorry, I didn't see this. Extra credit goes towards the first exam, but let's say that you got, it's worth the same as any exam grade, right? Let's say you got a 50 out of 50 on your first exam, which some people did. Then you get a 53 out of 50. It's just like adding it to literally any exam. Do we dive super deep in the material from the lecture notes from both modern aesthetics? Okay, so Modernism 1 specifically is more of an overview of the period. If I remember correctly, let me go ahead and move into that one while we're thinking about it, and then we'll move back to post-war Japan. I think we only have 30 minutes on here, so I really do want to focus on questions that you guys have rather than me and then if we have more time, I'll go through some of these things. But what I would do while you're in here as well, since you have access to a Word document, is pull it up as we're going through it and type in, right, anything that I say is important, which hopefully they should already be typed in from the videos we had before. Let me find this. Sorry, I had my folder up. There it is. So one was French New Wave. The other was, notes were called Modernist Aesthetics. And I think, no, this one's the French New Wave. There it is. I found it. Okay. So like least common denominator, that's bolded. That's probably one of those things that you need to know what that is. In general, you should know that from other classes as well, right? The least common denominator is essentially the largest pool amount of people that you can get. Whatever kind of content meets the largest amount of demand as possible, can fit all of these people's interest bubbles. And so that's one of the things you should know, obviously, because it's bolded. But hopefully, like in general, you should know this about the college experience by now if you are a freshman, or especially if you are a sophomore, right? We are no longer looking to just give you terms and you memorize them and spit them back and then forget about them for the rest of forever. At this point, we are trying to make sure that you retain and start learning about periods that will affect other things, right? So I am almost never going to ask you a question that is just like, what is the definition of this thing? I'm trying to see if you have incorporated this information as a sort of narrative, right? So in a way that you are actually understanding things, not memorizing things. Which is why oftentimes I'm asking distinction. What is the distinction between these two types of things? Or which one of these was not one of the things? Because I'm trying to see if you understand the context, right? But just making sure exam 3 is everything. No, this is not cumulative. In fact, one of the only reason that I allow it to go on for so long, so it appears like a final, right, is because I'm trying to extend. They gave us an extension on grades, and I feel like it's only ethical to, the same way that for exam 2 I extended that one longer in case people were dealing with things, especially in these times. So it is only extended that long because I'm trying to give you more time, that same extension, right, to do it. It's not a final. In fact, I always term my final exam 3, right, alongside exam 1 and exam 2 rather than final, because if I turn it exam 3, then I can do it on the last day of class. I can do it within the week rather than the finals period. And then it doesn't have to be cumulative. And so that way, yes, all of the lectures after exam 2 until now. So I think that is post-war Japan, modernism, French New Wave, specifically French New Wave. Those questions that you had to fill out are important, right? Because the documentary was a lecture that week. And then what's the final? Oh, postmodern. Postmodernism, especially since you're asking the distinction between the modernist aesthetics, what all will be tested on, and I'll go back to that, I promise, now that we're in content. Postmodernism, remember there's that little divide where all of those paragraphs at the bottom are me trying to like give you examples so that again you can understand it. And I'm trying to write out the examples because the postmodernist aesthetics are one of the most difficult things for people usually to understand. So most of those examples are things that are for you to understand. So as long as you understand the distinctions, like which part is the sensory motor link belongs to what? The action image. Where do we see the action image most often? Classical cinema, right? As long as you know that, because probably there's going to be a question, right? Which does the action image belong to? And it'll say classical cinema, modernist cinema, postmodernist cinema, and many of you, because it's on your notes for postmodernism, might put postmodernist aesthetics, right? When really in there, postmodernism, those notes, remember, we're like, hey, now we're at the end of the semester. It's very complicated for me to get into all these aesthetics of things that are existing in the contemporary moment. But let's do this broad overview of the things that we've learned and see it together as this kind of like these big chunk periods and like the bigger developments that occurred over them. So, and I don't see any more questions, so I'm going to move back into modernist, the beginning one that was kind of the big contextualization. So remember, least common denominator. And so since I say you need to know what least common denominator is, but many times because I'm not asking you of the definition so that you could sit back, I'm going to say, where do we see people looking to get the least common denominator of audiences most in cinema? What would be your answer?
I hope they play that one song with the shrieking nasal atonal woman over the bongos.
I hear someone, but I can't tell if it's just your mic isn't muted. Are you talking to me? Okay, maybe not.
What about meeting Padma's family?
Yeah. Anyone have an answer?
This is always what it looks like on Homeland. Right?
It would be Hollywood, right? because Hollywood cinema is where, remember we talked about, if you look at the paragraph directly under, so this would be you saying, I don't know where to find least common denominator. Quick, what do I do? So you go either find it in your notes, or you type in the Control F, least common denominator, or LCD, right? You go to it. There's a paragraph directly under that. That gives you the example of Marvel and Star Wars, and we talked about that whole idea of the values don't really stand for anything, right? So this is where you get your answer. It's never definition, spit it back to me. It's always, do you understand where these are actually applied inside of film theory, or cinema itself? So modernist aesthetics. Obviously, this is one of these 3 things that I'm going to want you to understand. The big one that we like hit on in Hitchcock for so long, both in the last exam, and we used it for so many examples in this exam, right? Was that exposition, the opening scene, in which how you could not tell this clear narrative, like kind of a through line like you used to in classical cinema. And so if you see these things like clear narrative motivations, remember also the characters are the same way, because we're now criticizing these kinds of middle class audiences in modernist aesthetics who are like wandering. They don't have any sense of purpose, and yet they're surrounded by all of the things that I'm trying to find my video again. There it is. And yet they're surrounded by all of these like objects that in classical cinema times constituted happiness. There's no longer any sort of set mise-en-scène of happiness anymore. They're looking for purpose, they're still troubled, they're still sad, and so they're kind of wandering through the narratives. So we need to know about character developments and tendencies. And then always remember that when we talk about developments, the big one that we used was the example of the Nazis. Where did the Nazis go? They don't go away. So my question would be, as we develop in any sort of aesthetic realm, do other modes of existence, do other modes of aesthetic expression just simply go away? No, we still have clear narrative through lines. We still have all of these mise-en-scène of classical cinema. So that would be a great true or false question, right? Is there a test dropped? No. Oh, you mean like lowest score dropped, or?
Second of all, we're about to play a new round, so start taking your pants off. Because when I win, I want you ready.
Will the finals grade replace the? Oh no, is that what you mean? No, finals grade will not replace. These are, remember the class is divided up into 4 chunks, right? You have 3 exams, all worth the same amount. The final thing that is worth the same amount as an exam is the discussion and attendance. No tests are dropped. Discussion and attendance is the, hopefully, if you did the bare minimum, right, is the 100 that everyone should get if you participate.
Bingo for me.
Discussions due tonight? Yes, yeah, 11:59 p.m. What I was saying at the beginning, I know quite a few people came in late. Please don't. I have one of my 20-page research papers due tomorrow. So if I am not in discourse with you in email, please don't panic. Do not get anxious. I promise you, I will allow you, if there's something that you did in order to answer a discussion, I am not going to say, nope, too bad, right? 11:59. We have until the 11th for me to turn in grades. So especially after this week, once my big 20-page papers, I will be much more responsive, and I promise you I will get you sorted out if you are having a problem. How am I grading attendance? So remember, you have 2 that are absences, no questions asked. So usually what I've done for my past class, I may have to be a little more lenient for this one. Obviously, the attendance for this last period was just per week. It wasn't 2 for each week. So if you responded, that's pretty much it. If you did the attendance at all in this discussion, that's it, because it's supposed to be you tune in. That's what it's gauging, right? The same way that all you do is sign your name when you're in class. So as I'm counting through attendance, which is why you don't get that grade until the very end of the semester, is because I have to take all of these papers that I've sent around class, and then I also have to go online, and I have to go through every single one of you, right? And see, they got 2 off. They've still got 100. Once you get the 3rd, usually I deduct a point, right? So you've got a 90, and then deduct another point. So you've got an 80, kind of thing. So.
First question.
Okay, well, let's move forward since we've only got 30 minutes here with some Obviously, I will go to your questions first if you ask one content-wise, but I'm going to keep plowing through since I don't see anything else. So those things at the top of that modernist thing are very important. The things at the bottom right there, those big chunk paragraphs that are comparing it to classical period, to refinement period, to Baroque period, you don't need to know which one was compared to which, because we already went through the experimental, classical, refinement, Baroque in extensive detail, and I thought that that's what would make most sense for you. I thought that maybe this would help with understanding. Those things are not things you'll be tested on. It's that these periods are like larger macro versions of what's happening there, kind of thing. Could we go over the 3 questions from the French documentary? Yeah, let's do that.
There is no longer
Let me.
solve the problem. I promise.
So, what is Cahiers du Cinéma? It's a critics magazine in France that goes with the modernist period. Truffaut criticizes Hollywood for what? Right, there are the 2 dualities, and this should also be in your notes on how it like straddles the bound between the 2, where it's like appealing to mass consumption, right? The profit margins, the doing all this like kind of, but then he also criticizes. Remember, Truffaut criticizes the high art film circuit, and that's for being too inaccessible, for being too scholarly and pretentious. Remember. So it's criticizing academia essentially, right? But then criticizing the other end of cinema when it's too pop culture and when it's appealing to the least common denominator, as our term. Sorry, I've got so many notes up here. I got to keep. There we go. Who were the 2 members of the French New Wave? Remember, that was Truffaut and Godard. Which one acted as a mentor for the other? Truffaut for Godard. Criticisms of Breathless. I'm not going to go through the criticisms. You don't need this. This was just to see, just so that you knew how it was being received at the time, because I think that's a good historical example. So yeah, those are the questions. Remember, growing middle class is important, and everything that goes around that, which there was a lot, so I can't go through all of it here. We talked about aimless striving. You need to know what subsumption is. That one should be an easy one. That one should be like a very back definition kind of thing. Let's do post-war Japan. There's a lot on post-war Japan that not too much from the movies, except for the basic kinds of things said inside of the notes, because I know that I asked you to watch that very difficult film on your own, and so there won't be. Usually in classes we go over what the aesthetics were from that. I didn't get to do that alongside you, so there isn't any of that. But Japan, if you want to follow along, that's where we're moving. Remember, Japan was the 2nd largest producer in that time. You also need to know the thing that we've gone over in each period, who were the 2nd largest producers now, which were Nollywood and Bollywood, remember? Who tends to do well at the first Asian Film Festival? What types of filmmakers, Japanese filmmakers? And that's important, right? Because it's people who are emulating Western style filmmaking who tend to do well, which kind of discourages, if you're talking about popularity and, again, profit margins, which kind of discourages them from developing too much of their own style. But then that's what the new wave is about, right? When we talk about Japanese new wave, it's not that everyone was doing this Western style cinema making, which, who was the big director, who was the most Western, who we watched the film in class? That's Kurosawa. But then we talked about Ozu as kind of the comparative, who's doing these very artsy, specifically very Japanese style filmmaking for the time, who's doing something different. So you need to know about both of those 2. You also need to know what was important about the 3rd one. Since we used the main 2 filmmakers, Ozu and Kurosawa, for comparison, you need to know, why did we include Kenzo Mizoguchi at all? It's, which he has a paragraph, I'll let you do that. Rashomon, the big breakthrough, wins an Oscar. You need to know a little, like I said, I think everything you need to know about Rashomon is in the notes. I don't think I asked you. Tell me what the difference between Fuji color, right? Especially from the lecture when we talked about Fuji color versus Technicolor. And Fuji color was, and we showed how it had such a different type of coloration. It seemed much brighter, almost more saturated. And remember, we talked about, I think we used the example of UCLA, why is it LA Rebellion, of course. Okay, so LA Rebellion civil rights movement, the filmmakers over there at UCLA were making this remember they were trying to get Fujifilm because it's something that could light black skin much nicer, right? Because they had much more diversity in skin tones over in Japan. And so I think one of the questions on there is something about like, can you tell the difference? You should know. Yes, because of that example. Post-war Japan were the two producers. Yeah, Nollywood and Bollywood, India and Nigeria, yes. Okay, let me go back to my notes. Cinema, so remember, you need to know when there's that whole paragraph on they're trying to eliminate the popularity of feudalism and nationalism. First of all, why? And then why did they let it come back? All of these things that are kind of beginning paragraphs here, you really need to know, especially since we don't get into much non-Western cinema because cinema develops in such a Western way, and so we don't afford the same amount of clarity to anything beyond that in the course of a beginning level class. And so so remember, Japan deserves most credit for rebuilding their economy and not the US, even though all of those paragraphs before, we're talking about how the US is interacting with Japan, what they are trying to do and how they are influencing cinema. Yeah, okay, so all of that stuff, especially, in fact, just about everything in this notes is very important. There are so many big, oops, sorry, I think I heard a message in there. Explain why Ozu is important and Ugetsu. Yeah, so Ozu, remember the clip we used was the vase scene because it's famous. And we showed that weird shot where he's famous for the low camera, the low positioned camera, and it just sits there. It doesn't even sometimes it angles up, but remember when we saw the vase, we just see these people walking by with their feet. So low angled camera is important there. Famous vase scene might be important. And the parametric filmmaker. So Ozu is the perfect example of a parametric filmmaker, and you need to know what the difference between parametric and auteur is. So just like parametric sounds, it's parameters. It's based on limits. So if you get to that question in your exam, you should not have to go look that up in the notes. That should be one of the quick ones that you say, where you say, oh, it's got parameters, right? It's got limits. So this type of filmmaker is the one who sets clear boundaries and they never cross them, kind of thing, which is different from an auteur who says, these are clear things that I like to include and repeats these patterns. And so then you should either know parametric, I can't remember which I included this time, but you should either know parametric as that definition, how it's distinct from auteur, or that Ozu is the prime example of that. Ugetsu. Oh, so you don't need to know much about Ugetsu. That's the clip that I use as an example. I'm not even sure if I remember, since we're in this digital lecture, if I had you guys watch that this time. What you need to know about Kenzo Mizuguchi is what comes directly after. He's a legend. So I think I asked you, like, what is he legendary for? Because he's one of the legendary moving camera people alongside Kubrick. And so that's why I include him. He's so important because if you are on that level of Kubrick, you should probably be included on, right, for your moving camera, you should probably be included on notes for post-war Japan. The reason we were comparing the other two is because one had such a weird new wave style of filmmaking and one had the more Western version. Okay. I think I answered that question. Let's move on to postmodernism, since I think we still have time. Postmodernism is where I am probably the most strictly keeping to the notes because it is so confusing. And I know that it can get confusing for you, especially when there are so many examples I would use in class that I didn't get to use for this. And so I apologize for that. I wish that we got to keep meeting in person. It's very difficult to do a cinema class on digitally. You would think it would be easy, but I can't ensure that you guys are watching the clips in the same way I can if I say, remember, we went over it all together in class kind of thing, because I know, and I don't blame you for it, I know you guys are all very stressed having to balance 5 different classes in which you are having to do all these different micro tasks to complete. But that's the point. If I can't guarantee that you have watched something like I can inside of a classroom environment if you showed up, then I find it very difficult for me to expect you to know that on a test. So postmodernism, I did the same thing as I did with modernist aesthetics, where postmodernism, I went into what are the big contextual developments that happen over the course of the period. I'm running out of time, it says. So if I cut out, I apologize. You need to know those things from modernism, like auteurism. You need to know the specific definition that I gave you for cahiers du cinema that isn't in your note, the political part of it, right? Why was the hyper individualist obsession with the auteur not radical or political anymore? The exposition was the big aesthetic marker we used for this, which we talked about. So I would just, honestly, for these, I would just go through and reread, make sure that you have some sort of idea about what's going on. Think about the post-truth mediascape. That's something that we need to know. Something I address in that lecture a lot is, does post-truth also mean post-fact? What is the answer? And obviously I use multiple examples in this. The answer is no. And how many times articles that include fact can look very different. The conclusion that we were supposed to draw from it, from an article that also includes all facts, right? But because they use different facts and they omit different information, it appears as if the right solution for us going forward is radically different, right? So then when you think about it in terms of, does everyone get all facts, or do they mix it in with misleading facts? Do they also mix it in with opinions? When you think about all the different conglomerations of what could happen with people including things, we don't go back into Pan's Labyrinth or Paprika. So Paprika was more for like the second exam as the big example. Pan's Labyrinth was for the first example. And I use those films obviously because they're incredibly relevant to now. But no, we don't talk about any of that material anymore. Does not mean that we're beyond truth. Media reliant age. I don't think I test on this, but again, I would go back and just reread this because this is big contextualized. And then for the last portion, I don't know if I'm going to cut out sometime soon. I probably will. Rupture and sensory motor link, right? These are things that are very distinction based. You need to know the space of the virtual and how there can constitute either a larger or smaller space of the virtual depending on what objects and affordances and what kind of situation you are thrown in as a person. Which films will be discussed on the test. Hitchcock's, we use a lot of like Hitchcock's, which one was it? Rear Window to exemplify many things on this one. And then I don't think we have any big film for this one. You just need to know the clips that were included inside of the lecture that I said specifically in the lecture. Okay, watch this alongside me so that we can know. Yeah, no problem. Does anyone know the time? Can I see it anywhere? I think this might be the end for me. Well, let's end it here. If you have any more questions on durée, which is any time whatsoever, remember that once we get to that line in that last notes, those are mainly examples to help you out. You need to know the distinctions between all of the stuff like intensive and extensive and whatnot. Question last exam about Hitchcock confused me a bit. Since we're running out of time, will you send me an email about that because I don't know what question that is, and then I can address it specifically. Okay, thanks everyone. Any last questions? Okay. Cool. Well, I will see you. Let me